Is it recording, guys? Yes. Admitting.
Pina koutou katoa. My name's Lynn Mays. I'm the scheme manager for the soft plastic recycling scheme. And I'm joined today by Barry Cozier and Oscar Nicholson from the Soft Plastic Stewardship Australia. Have I got that right? Correct, guys? Scheme, and they will introduce themselves in one moment. Just to advise that we will be recording this session, so that it's available for yourselves and also for other members later. If you could all put yourself mics on mute.
Circular or recycled price.
Sorry, if you could put your mics on mute, please, because we've got some noise coming through. It's now muted. That was not intentional. So, as I say, we will be recording this session. We'll also leave time for questions at the end of the session. So we will take questions at the end. If you do have questions that you want to put into the chat, that's fine. But we do want to make this as interactive as possible. And so happy for people to raise their hands at the end of this, and we'll take questions directly. This session is aimed at our members, either members of the New Zealand scheme or of the Australian scheme. But we have also welcomed prospective members and also stakeholders who are really interested in the schemes on both sides of the ditch. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Barry to introduce himself and to Oscar.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Yeah, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Barry Cozier, acting or interim co-CEO of Soft Plastic Stewardship Australia. For those who aren't aware, currently on secondment from the Australian Food and Grocery Council. And I'll talk through the history of this in a moment's time. And I'll hand over to Oscar to do a quick intro as well.
Hello all, Oscar. I'm Head of Partnerships and Marketing at SPSA, and I'm very excited to talk to you all about how we're working together, the differences, the similarities, and generally what the future of soft plastic recycling is across the Tasman.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So today's discussion, we're going to be alternating between speakers so you don't get bored of one or other of us. And we'll be providing, as Oscar said, an update on both the schemes, the approaches where they align and where they are different, end-of-life recycling options, fee structures and pathways forward. We do aim to show the similarities and also where there are divergences. Today's webinar actually continues a collaboration that started between the AFGC and the Packaging Forum in the design of soft plastic stewardship schemes back in 2020. I mean, I have sat on the SPRS advisory group, and Barry reciprocated recently on the PPPS project team. So this is something that we have been working on and trying to collaborate on for some time. Next slide, please. I'm really thrilled to be able to say that in November this year, New Zealand Soft Plastic celebrates a decade of recycling. And next slide, please. As many of you who've been along for the ride know, it's been a roller coaster. We launched in 2015, started with 14 members funding the programme and with financial support from the Waste Minimisation Fund. Our scheme in New Zealand was based on the Red Cycle system. And from 2015 through to 2018, soft plastic was collected, and then exported to Australia. When this market collapsed in 2018, we stopped collection. Our restart was made possible when Future Post set up in Auckland. And we've now got around 200 members who fund the collection, baling, transport and gate fees. And of note, the scheme has applied for an extension to its accreditation under the Waste Minimisation Act as a priority product. Next slide for Barry.
Okay. For those of you who don't know who SPSA is, Soft Plastic Stewardship Australia, it's an entity, as Lynn mentioned, that was formed last August, I think it was, either late July or early August 2024. So we're just about to celebrate our first birthday. We'll have to actually go to the ASIC website and see when our birthday is. I think it is about now. But it's a culmination of two work streams. As Lynn rightly points out, the work of the National Plastic Recycling Scheme that was initiated by the Australian Food and Grocery Council back in 2020, and the work of the Soft Plastics Task Force being Coles, Woolies and Audi. So both those pieces of work were very similar in nature, with a real mindset on how do you secure end markets. So take my hat off to the retailers. They've done a lot of work and accelerated the end market development here, which we'll talk to a bit later. And the NPRS, many people think it's all about collection. It was about how do you scale infrastructure, and you can't scale infrastructure without volumes of collection. So hence why we spend a fair bit of time looking at curbside collections, which Oscar will talk you through shortly. So I'll jump into the next slide. And Lynn just rightly pointed out that the last 10 years, a bit of a roller coaster in New Zealand. So you can just pull the next slide up if you can. And I'll give you a quick heads up on, I'm not going to talk through each line here, but back in 2020, just before the government introduced the new RAW Act, so that was a new piece of legislation in Australia that introduced a pathway from voluntary product stewardship to co-regulatory to regulatory product stewardship. Before that was even an idea, the AFGC had looked at it and said, we need to actually, own up as an industry, step up and start looking at product stewardship like in other countries. One of the conditions from the AFGC board back then was they wanted to be lockstep with New Zealand if at all possible. And both countries have had very different regulatory pathways and different governments, so different views over the preceding 5 years. But where Australia went to is the RAW Act was created, grant funds were made available. We were lucky enough to get be awarded $1 million grant, so that kicked off the NPRS. In parallel, Nestle were working with IQ Renew and developed the Curvy Bag program and did the trial that actually was a case study or let's call it a case study or a working proof of concept is what I'm looking for, to show that you can take post-consumer soft plastics and process it through chemical recycling and back into packaging. So the next 2 years, the NPRS ran along, and in parallel, this is a really key point. IQ Renew and APRC, two of our partner processors, started running and building demonstration plants, and it's taken them better part of 4 to 5 years to commercialize. So the lead time on infrastructure is extremely long because it's a new market. 2022, most people know Red Cycle collapsed in Australia. The task force was formed. The good news is if you go right to the right-hand side, we're working through an ACCC application. It may have come out today, but it hasn't. So it's going to be either late July or early August, and we're confident we'll get the green light to actually start operating the scheme from September, October this year. The beauty of this is we do have infrastructure in place. But for anyone who's new to this, it's taken 4 to 5 years to get the investment confidence and the confidence in the feedstock that we can actually kick this off in later this year. So I'll hand back to Lynn.
I don't know whether I was losing Wi-Fi there, so I'll keep my camera off at the moment. So next slide, please. So 87% of New Zealanders now have access to a soft plastic recycling bin at a participating New World, Pack and Save, The Warehouse or Woolworths store. We also have around 100 other collection points on the network where our members pay to have a soft plastic recycling service at their premises. And we've also commenced the first curbside collection trial in Nelson. So next slide for you, Barry.
I'll take this one. So as Barry mentioned, the Red Cycle collapse set us back a few years. So even though Red Cycle might have been the progenitor for SPRS, because of that collapse, we actually saw collection go backwards. And in lieu of that, we've stepped in and we've actually undertaken curbside trials starting beginning of last year, if I'm not mistaken. It was before my time. So if you could just go next slide, you'll see that come up on the map. So across locations, 9 councils in South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales, we collected a significant amount of material. And after this, I'll actually go through some of the findings from that. And we're also undertaking a large-scale market research program to determine what the best way to collect plastic actually is, and to validate that. We had our assumptions, but we had to validate it with research. Those collections proved to be very, very successful and also led to Queensland. Could you just hit the next slide there? Before that, though, I'll just mention the Soft Plastic Task Force, which Barry mentioned on some of his slides, which consists of the big retailers, have started a in-store collection, which is currently just over 500. I think they might be getting close to 600 now, across South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. And that is material that's going to IQ Renew to feed the beast that is their 20,000 tonne a year appetite for post-consumer soft plastic. And if you just hit the next slide, we've also got in Queensland a commercial demonstration, which is somewhat modelled on the curbside trials that we ran down in Victoria and South Australia and New South Wales. And that is going to get underway next year. It's government funded, but we'd be running across 3 councils another trial that would consist of curbside and in-store. So the findings from the curbside trials that we did last year, if you just go to the next slide, were very interesting and really validated a lot of our assumptions. So no surprises, curbside collection was far and away the preferred method of collection with 92.4%. And basically what we were asking consumers to do is to fill an orange bag, an easily identified bag, with their soft plastic, and then to simply put that in their recycling bin, which in Australia is a yellow top bin. While I was in New Zealand last, I didn't get a chance to actually look at your bins, New Zealanders, but basically, similar kind of thing. I suppose, the separate recycling bin, which is mixed recycling, cardboard, plastic, that sort of thing. Putting the soft plastic in there in a bag made it very easy for the MRFs to separate out. We found participation to be surprisingly good, and it peaked within about 3 months. Bear in mind that the communications campaigns to basically increase awareness and engagement with those trials was relatively low. The sort of campaign that we'd be looking to undertake for a national rollout will be much more concerted and multi-channel. This was largely communicated through council channels, and so we were pretty surprised to get such high participation, and that peaked around the 3-month mark. And the rates per capita were higher than they were for Red Cycle. So another validation that curbside is the way to go, because Red Cycle was just in-store collection. You go to the next slide. So the actual contents of the bags were excellent, less than 2% contamination, food material, that sort of thing, maybe the odd item that shouldn't have been in there, but by and large, 2% is a really good and easily remediated rate of contamination. If you hit the next slide, the actual contamination within the MRF was also extremely low, so less than 1% of soft plastic material ended up in other waste streams. And so that basically validated that the bags are indeed a good way to run through MRFs, and further validated the need for curbside as the primary vehicle for post-consumer collection. And I'll hand back over to Lynn, if you go to the next slide.
So we've had the opportunity in New Zealand to learn from Australia and also the UK trials for curbside collections. And the design of the bag there, the orange bag, was done in conjunction with Australia, so that we were as aligned as possible on the messaging. In New Zealand, we've been limited by the government standardisation of curbside recycling, which did not allow for trials in the commingled bins. So our trial in Nelson was set up with a separate pass-through vehicle. So the vehicle was we organised a separate vehicle to come round and pick the orange bag out of the glass crate the day after the glass crate was emptied. So it didn't actually go through the commingled curbside collection, but we ran the trial really to provide the experience and also to understand whether it, the level of uptake from households. So we went out to the community in Nelson, and we asked for of people wanting to be part of the trial, including the Mayor of Nelson, who you can see there, the Honourable Nick Smith, who is also part of the trial. So during the period between October and May, we collected 8,790 orange bags. Just to put this in perspective, if we extrapolate the amount up for a full year, each participating household would be recycling just under 8.5 kilograms of soft plastic. What was unexpected was that our store drop-off collections increased during the same period by 45%. So the awareness in Nelson of the scheme meant that people were dropping off at the supermarkets and stores, as well as having the trial going on at curbside. We had similar contamination levels or low contamination levels, and the average weight per bag that was being put out was almost half a kilo, or just over half a kilogram each week, or every other week. So next slide, please. Our participation levels. Sorry, next slide, please. There we go. We also had very high community engagement. Back again, please. There you go. Target hit. And similar to the experience in Australia, most households who were using the trial had not actually previously used the store drop-off system. So these were new soft plastic recyclers. And the level of engagement was high. The desire to retain it as an option was over 95% of the people of the 1,000 households. And actually, in the market research, I think we had about 80% of those 1,000 households responded to our market research. It was a really high level of engagement. The next steps for the trial are we've extended it out to the end of this year. In the meantime, the government will allow for councils or schemes to apply to be part of a trial within the commingled system. We are now working with the Nelson Council to see how we might integrate it within the curbside collection system to run it as moving away from a separate collection network, which, whilst it works really well, it's expensive, and it's also not environmentally sensible to be putting an extra vehicle on the road to do the collection service. So the next slide, please. What I wanted to explain here is what we mean by soft plastic recyclable. So 10 years ago, we adopted a simple consumer message. If you can scrunch your plastic into a ball, you can put it in the soft plastic recycling bin. The message for our members and for brands is more nuanced. To be able to label your plastic as soft plastic recyclable, it has to meet our thresholds. And our thresholds since the outset have been a minimum of 70% polyethylene or polypropylene and up to 30% of permitted secondary materials. We've retained these levels, and they are different from Australia. We've retained them because in New Zealand, all of our reprocessing is mechanical. And currently, those mechanical recyclers can accept these thresholds. We are, however, looking at moving to towards CETHEX standards, which you'd see on the left there of the slide, to support the opportunities for advanced recycling and film-to-film processes, and that would help us align with Australia. So the next slide, please. In terms of our performance, in 2024-25, the financial year, we recycled, we turned around 770 tonnes of soft plastic into either post. About 94% of those went to Future Post and the balance to Saveboard. The chart on the right shows our 10-year progress and the importance of having domestic recycling systems. So you can see there in 2018, where there was a lot collected, but we had nowhere to send it, and we had to then restart with our onshore reprocessing. Our 2000, so it's one thing I would say, and it's true for both sides, both countries, it's critical to balance what we collect with the processing capacity. And our 25 to 26 target is to recycle over 1,000 tonnes. We're currently running at around 90 tonnes processing per month. So the next slide, please. Our message and our consistent message now is to ask members and ask stakeholders, are you actually recycling if you don't buy recycled? So if you're not buying products that are made out of what our recyclers are turning soft plastic and other materials into, then the circular economy just doesn't work. This is actually a global issue. In Europe, the industry reports that the total capacity of facilities that shut down in 2024 doubled compared to 2023, and that the situation has intensified during 2025. What we know in New Zealand is we have to support our domestic reprocessors with gate fees which reflect real costs, and we need to support investment in new technologies. And that really is no different, I think, to what's happening in Australia. So I'll hand back over the slide deck to you, Barry and Oscar.
Right, thanks, Lynn. So if you can jump to the next slide, what Lynn is saying there is absolutely key. The lessons of Red Cycle are very clear in that you should never collect more than you can, the end market demand is, your processing capacities, or your scheme can fund. So there's that the lowest of those three elements is the maximum you can and should collect. So what we're looking at is we've got a lot of data on this. Aaron and Oscar and the team are doing a lot of work on due diligence with processors. In Australia, all up, there's about 22 prospective processors. But when you actually go and talk to them and find out, and if you add up all their proposed tonnages, it's about 400,000 tonnes. However, when you talk to them and find out, do you have financial close? Have you performed a feasibility study? Have you ordered equipment? All the steps towards commercialization. There's about 4 individual organisations who are either operating or have in the middle of commissioning. So that bottom or those green bars indicate the headline capacity. That if you add those 4 together, that's where we see them going. So we're going to be up to around 25,000 tonnes in about 2 years' time. So for those of you who are unaware of what Red Cycle used to collect, that's 3 times Red Cycle collections. within about 2 years' time. However, when you ask the question, do you have end market contracts and offtake agreements? That's where they're very nascent and they're building. So to Lynn's point, if you can purchase material, and IQ Renew in Australia, they do pellets and flake, everything from mechanical right through that up to a chemical recycling standard. So we see that growing over time. So where we will see the collection volumes, we will kick off where that solid orange line is. And as investment confidence grows, and as our funding grows, and as the end market demand grows, we'll step it up to about where that orange, the dotted orange line is. The other thing we're looking at doing is making sure we don't have a single processor reliance. So we'll never push collections to the maximum of processing capacity. We'll always stay back in case there's an issue like a fire or a shutdown. So we need to have some a bit of contingency there. So to drive the volume up, things we're looking at, Oscar and Aaron are working a lot on end market demand, working through with some of the companies who will buy the pellets and develop those into end market products. We have an alignment with APCO that will help us recruit additional members. We're talking to the government a lot about regulated membership. And then once we have those, that's when we'll start expanding the in-store collection network. Oscar mentioned earlier there's about 500 stores currently collecting. The locations of those means it reaches about 50% of Australia's population within a 5-kilometre radius, roughly around those numbers. So we're getting back towards a very good collection network, and Victoria has their draft curbside collection standards in place, just waiting for the regulation. So that will give a lot of investment confidence and kick that along. So we're just waiting for that step. So we can go to the next slide, please. So to fund that, I talked about we need to make sure we've got enough funding. And so the funding has to grow in line with the capacity and the collections that we plan over time. So if you just go to the next slide, the next build. One of the things we've looked at, and one more, is we've got the legacy stockpile. So we could see it as a liability, but it's actually turned out to be a real asset to the organisation and to fast track infrastructure confidence. So most people on this call work in manufacturing companies, and when you get new plant and equipment, you have to have your raw materials in, you have to run trials, you have to run demos, you have to make sure you've got competency and you've got the capability to produce your finished goods that you promise to a retailer. The recycling sector is no different. So without the red cycle stockpile, there was nothing for them to test new infrastructure with. So that stockpile has been really pivotal in getting IQ Renew up and running and able to sort material into the 3 different grades they have and now develop the markets. The same for APR, the same for a few others who we're currently working with. So the agreement we've struck with the task force, they will have spent, by the time they finish processing, they will have spent somewhere between $25 and $30 million storing that and processing it. Roughly about 20 to 30% of what they're processing would be Coles, Woolies and Aldi branded products. The rest is other brands, not just supermarket brands, but from other sectors as well. So we've agreed that we will contribute up to $16 million. So just under half of the total cost, and that would be paid back over 8 years. So it's I think they're pretty generous terms, and we thank the retailers for taking the lead on that. So our levy going forward, that's in the ACCC application, is once we subject to approval, that will kick off at $160 a tonne. About $9 of that will be allocated and going to the retailers to repay that loan, and that is over the 8 years. And you'll see from Lynn's slide in a few pages that the New Zealand levy is very, very similar to what we're projecting here. We've done totally independent numbers, but the system costs are very similar. So we'll go from 160 up to circa $400 a tonne in the next 3 to 4 years. So I'll just hand back to Lynn.
Next slide, please. So we currently in New Zealand, as members know, operate with a membership fee. That's the same structure. It's gone up slightly, or membership fees have gone up, but it's the same structure in 2015. I think everybody recognises that we need to move to a placed on market tonnage EPR type system. These numbers that you see here are based on the PPPS. So those of you that were involved in the PPPS process scheme design will be familiar with these numbers. So they are an example of what the fees might look like, but as Barry said, remarkably similar to what's being proposed for Australia. So if you look at this, soft plastics within the scheme would sit there in category B, being the drop-off of other system in place. If we were to move to a curbside collection of soft plastics, it would be in category A. And if it's not recyclable, i.e. it is outside of the threshold for being considered soft plastic, it would sit in category C. Are an example of what a fee structure might look like under an EPR system. And I'll pass back to Barry then for a comparison with the UK.
Now, many of you would be well aware of the regulation that's happening in the UK. And if you just go to the next slide, please. The UK has been, I think they're in their third wave of packaging regulation review. If you can just go to the build and bring the whole slide up, it would be good. So for the last 5 years, they've been going through their third review, right up until the point where they've created PAC UK. So it's a government regulated organisation, and it's got industry participants on it. Someone I know who was on the steering committee for that said they were very happy. They've got the regulation in place, they've got the indicative levies published, and then they all sat around and went, hang on, we've got no one to actually do the work. So we can actually, the government could levy brands, but there was nowhere to spend the money. So it was going to be ineffective. So they're now creating, they've called for PROs, so producer responsibility organisations, to be created so they can actually go out and contract and increase the recycling. But there's a big difference in the models of what is happening in the UK and what is proposed here. And if we compare the cost in the UK for an indicative business to what we're proposing, it's 32 times more costly. So if you look at that table at the bottom, extended producer responsibility means brands and retailers cover the cost of education, collection, sortation, recycling, and in some cases, it could be more the end market development as well as litter cleanup. So it can cover all of those things. So funding goes into each. That's not a zero cost. That's a part of the levy covers all of those. And if you look at their levies per tonne, and this is in comparative Australian dollars, you can see there, you go to the second bottom line, soft plastics is $994 a tonne in the UK. On top of that, they still have a producer, a PRN, a packaging recovery note. So there's another cost on top. They're not published. That's why we haven't put it in, because there's multiple charges from different organisations. And on top of that is a £200 per tonne or $300 a tonne plastics tax if you don't meet the recycled content thresholds. So the levy there is circa, $1,200 to $1,500 a tonne soft plastics. And if you can go just one more build, please, Laura. One more. Sorry, got a lot of builds in this slide. Yeah, you just keep going till the table comes up. You can see in Australia and New Zealand, very similar at $160 a tonne just for soft plastics. And that's because we're going to capitalise on the existing, we plan to capitalise on the existing curbside system over time, which lowers the collection costs. The sortation costs are lower because we're using the current MRF infrastructure, and where the brand's money then goes is actually into the actual recycling. So it's a lot more effective, a lot more efficient. And by comparison, an organisation on the left would be spending $5.1 million in levies, and here it would be $160,000 to $160,000 per annum. So a significant saving, and what we hope is probably a bit more effective. So I'll hand back to you, Lee.
Okay, so next slide, we're just going to talk a little bit about our membership and how this fares. So the New Zealand scheme's got a quite a varied membership, as you'll see, between food brands, retailers, packaging manufacturers, and the service sector. Membership's grown, and it's around 200 members currently. It is challenging because, as everybody knows, there's a cost of living crisis, and we are a voluntary scheme. So we do need to retain and build membership to be able to fund the system, because we do pay for the collection of the soft plastics from stores. We pay for its baling, its transport, and the gate fees associated with processing. So I'll pass over to you, Barry. I think it's Oscar taking this one for the membership for SPSA.
Thanks, Lynn. So similarly, we've got a number of fantastic members who have completely voluntarily decided to support the scheme, and we thank them as much as possible. We're building out our offering to them as well to make their lives as easy as possible as we navigate this transition. Currently, we estimate by tons on market, about 15% of the market is a member at the moment, but that leaves 85% who are what we charitably can call free riders, and so we really are working on trying to bring everybody on the journey, because one of the key reasons why this has been built as an industry-led solution is that everybody wants to avoid the government regulating, because it's going to cost more, you'll have less wiggle room, it'll be less nimble, and we really saw that with the container deposit schemes, which I'd worked on, the Queensland one, where the fact that it was legislated did mean to say that the ability to adapt over time really was curtailed, and so us building something that is industry-led and fit for purpose for industry is going to be a much more equitable solution for producers. Could you just go to the next slide there? So we have quite a few overlaps in our participation. Some of you might actually see them. I'll just get them circled up on the board. Just hit next slide there again. Again, I build this one. There we go. Okay, so there we go. So these are the members who we have that are also members of the New Zealand scheme, and we are basically these are the the kind of super members in a sense, in that they're really working across the Tasman to work for change, and I think over time everybody else that's relevant will be moving working across the Tasman and taking advantage of the ways that we can kind of harmonize across the Tasman as well, because in many ways New Zealand and Australia acts as one market for many of these members, many of these producers, many of these brands, and so for the likes of Woolworths and Colgate, Australia and New Zealand operates as kind of one country really. Next slide. I think it's back over to you, Lynn.
Yes, so and we are coming to the end of this slide deck, so very, very swiftly. Our priorities really for the next couple of years: support the New Zealand reprocessors to drive demand. This is absolutely critical, and we do recognise that gate fees will need to increase as they are doing around the world. We are working on improving the network efficiency. We're introducing waste stewardship audits with key members. As we've mentioned, we've got trials of curbside collections. We're working with the SPSA to leverage opportunities. And we are working on a heads of agreement for the two schemes to Packaging Forum and the SPSA to work together. And we're looking at the opportunities for database systems which are aligned. So next slide, please. And this is my final one. Future direction. So I mentioned earlier the scheme, we applied for accreditation as a priority product back in August last year because our voluntary accreditation expired at the end of March this year. So the application as a priority product is under assessment with the Ministry for the Environment. They've asked for more information around governance, funding, cost benefit analysis, etc., which is what we expected. This would allow, if we do get accreditation, it would allow the existing scheme to operate as an accredited scheme until the Minister decides on the application for a replacement scheme. A number of options have been presented by the Ministry for consideration, and they will be with the steering committee for review. So that is something that we are looking at because we recognise that accreditation is key for our members as well. And I'll hand over back to you, Barry and Oscar, for your closing slide.
Okay. Thanks, Lynn. So what does this look like in a diagram? What are our next steps? So the green circles are where there is currently market failure. We're very good at putting food and grocery items into soft plastics. They're doing their job, doing a great job of protecting the product and ending up in homes. But as we all know, there's very limited collection and recycling at the moment. So the focus there will be on collection here, initially expanding the return to store collection network, because it's totally within the control of the scheme through the retailers. Over time, we will then expand the curbside collection in line with processing capacity and market development, run that through MRFs, and then into both chemical and or mechanical recycling. Very fortunate we have IQ Renew operating at scale already in the country. Already had some containers of A-grade pellets sent offshore for chemical recycling, initially as small trials and then at commercial trial stage. So that is all going to plan and going extremely well. However, at the moment, we can't contract because until we get an ACCC authorisation, that would be called collusion, not collaboration. So we're about hopefully 2 weeks away from getting the draft authorisation. You can go to the next slide, Donna. What does that allow us to do? It allows us initially to charge a levy. If you go to the next slide, that would be great. Back one would be good. It allows us to charge a levy, and then one of the key steps we can then do is roll an RFI out to the market. So we can assess how many councils want to participate, how many other retailers want to participate in collections. We can assess the market for processing as well, right the way through to wrap up the supply chain and match supply of feedstock with end market demand and processing in the middle. Once we get through that, we'll and get into the final authorization, we'll be able to transition agreements from the retailers that they currently have with IQ Renew and others into SPSA. Now that will save us a lot of time and give a lot of investment confidence to the processors. And then out of the RFI, we'll be able to get those into contracts. So that's sort of the timeline going forward. If you can just skip forward again, Donna. So on a very simple timeline, you can see where we are. We're about to head into August. The draft authorization was due in July. I've noticed the ACCC website has now said July, August, so that's moved across a little bit. And so once we get the green light, we envisage by October, we'll be able to operate in our own right and expand the drop-off collections, expand the council collections, and move from the RFI into actual contracts. So one slide to finish. You can go to the next slide. Oh, one more. I'll skip this one, Donald, and go to the final slide. How do the schemes compare? So as Lynn said right at the start, Lynn and I spent a lot of time working on this together. Lynn's input into the development of NPRS and subsequently SPSA has been invaluable. And I hope she will say something nice about me as well, some input I've had back up on the Triple PS. But both schemes, we've used the same consultants where possible. We've consulted with the same schemes globally, so it's no surprise we have a lot of synergies. We have slight different regulatory environments, but where we've ended up is both schemes, proposed schemes, are independent and voluntary not-for-profits. They'll both have boards that will be predominantly, if this is SPSA in New Zealand is aiming for the same, and then you're still going to go through the regulatory process, an industry-led board, but with independent directors and value chain representation, either through board positions or stakeholder advisory councils. Collections, you've seen, we've talked about those, very much in the same process there. Both looking at mechanical recycling predominantly. Australia, we've got our first chemical recycling plant, commercial plant, being constructed at the moment in Melbourne, or just out of Melbourne. The funding, as we've seen, is very similar, which gives a bit of confidence that we've both done our homework and done our maths right. I won't talk to the volume, but they're probably pro rata, pretty right for the pretty comparable, I should say, for the populations, and our end market development is the same. So through the heads of agreement, we plan to look at other things of where there's alignment and synergies and so on going forward. And so we'll keep moving on at pace and try to keep everyone updated. So if you're not part of either scheme, please reach out to Lynn, Oscar, or I. We'd love to have you on board, and we can then jump into some questions now. So Lynn, do you want to manage the questions, or do you just want me to go from the top?
Yeah, go from the top.
So the first one is for New Zealand, Lynn. I'm not sure if you can see it. If over time,
yeah, read it out.
Yeah. No, you go for it, Oscar.
Sure.
If you've already read it, I haven't read it yet. So.
Yeah. If Peter Cox asks if over time the plan is to extend SP collection to curbside beyond in-store, will the curbside recycling processes be able to turn soft plastic into recycled material? I hear a lot of present curbside material gets simply dumped into landfill in NZ.
So it's a real work in progress, because first of all we'll have to get it into the curbside collections. So there's a process for that. We are using the orange bag system, and that's similar to Australia. In the UK they're using blue bags, and the bags then are picked out at the MRF and baled separately. That is the way the systems largely work. So it's not loose soft plastic going through the system, because the MRFs aren't, generally speaking, capable of separating out soft plastic if it's just loose in the recycling bin. There are some MRFs in the UK which are, and Europe, which are using robots, and that can happen. But for most of our MRFs, it would be the orange bag system. And then the reprocessing is really driven by the scheme.
You may have dropped out there, Lynn. So we'll jump into the next one. And Lynn, if you come back, we'll get you back on again. One from Melissa Woods about how do we ensure that food grade PCR resin is commercially viable and affordable. It's a key question. We hear that one a lot. Most recycled food grade plastics, and I'll talk rigids and flexible, is at a premium. So in Australia, the government is well aware of that. Because of the oil production, as we know, is plentiful. The prices are low. It's almost impossible to compete when you have to go through such a long supply chain to recover plastics and recycle. So it will always be at a premium. So in Australia, the government is looking at recycled content mandates, and that is to produce a level playing field. It's also to give investment confidence to the processors, so that more would be collected, more recycled, and more demanded, which will bring the unit cost down over time. So that's the way the Australian government is looking to do that. And then if everyone has to procure a certain amount, it becomes a level playing field. The other thing, in talking to a couple of the packaging suppliers locally, there are global indices being developed. I think it was called a sustainability accreditation for PCR. So the pricing is now coming in at an agreed or at a market price. So I won't get into anything confidential there, but the market is forming up because the supply is increasing. We are still well aware that there is a global shortage of food grade PCR for soft plastics and from soft plastics, and that's going to potentially drive the price high. So one of the things we're looking at doing, subject to ACCC authorization, is using the red cycle material, is actually run a case study, another proof of concept, where members have first right of refusal to procure the material. So at the moment, we're short of end markets. So if we can get that turned into recycled content, either through US chemical recycling or some in Asia, and bring that back, that is something we're looking to do as part of the scheme, but post ACCC authorization.
I'd just add to Melissa that your question is one we've had a few times from industry and seems to be largely born out of what happened with the beverage container recycling scheme and the cost of PET, recycled PET, being too high and pricing beverage manufacturers out of the market. And so we're aware of that challenge and how potentially unfair it is that industry pays for a scheme that they are then priced out of. So we are working to solve that, probably with a first right of refusal type mechanism.
And the last question I can see there, are there any plans to update the ARL logos checked locally? If so, when would any changes be expected? So in Australia, and I'll let Lynn talk to New Zealand, the ACCC, the competition regulator, had set a date for July of this year to remove all red cycle logos from packaging. And the check locally logo is the preferred option. So we definitely encourage any members, if you still have red cycle on your packaging, you are going to need to remove that immediately. The ACCC will be watching for that. It's been 2 years. So they've sort of granted a bit over 2 years to have that removed from shelf. So definitely move across to the ARL check locally is the advice. I'm not sure, Lynn, whether you want to make any comment on New Zealand.
Yeah, for New Zealand, our members can either use the soft plastic recycling logo for New Zealand or Recycle at Store logo. And in terms of the ARL, have the option to use return to store, Recycle at Store, or the check locally, primarily because the main system in New Zealand for recycling is to take it back to the supermarket or to the warehouse, so to a store. As and when it becomes there are curbside collections options available, then the check locally label would be more appropriate.
Right, a few more questions coming in. Will there be a national education campaign for the rollout as it progresses, or will it be via councils? From an Australian perspective, it's a yes and yes. So as the return to store network rolls out, we would promote that. But generally through stores, it's the most effective way to promote it. We won't spend a lot of money on promotions, especially when we've got capacity constraints. However, when you roll out the councils, it has to be local area marketing, because you don't want residents in an adjacent council thinking they can put their soft plastics just straight into a bin when their MRF isn't collecting it. So that will be very specific, very targeted marketing, rolling out only within the council boundaries.
eventually there'd be some form of national campaign once we've got enough national coverage, and you know, hopefully we can do something on the scale of, say, a Keep Australia Beautiful or a you know, Do the Right Thing type campaign. But as Barry said, you know, this is going to be a phased rollout that will be very much carefully calibrated to match supply to demand. There's no use us collecting plastic that can't be processed. So yeah, there'll be a pretty complex strategy to support councils to communicate when they come on board.
And for New Zealand, it would be linked to when the soft plastics becomes a priority product, if and when it becomes a priority product, and regulations are underpinning it, so that there is funding there to actually conduct an education campaign. I think in the PPPS, there were recommendations that up to 3% would be spent of revenue would be spent on an education campaign. I think that was the number, but it was something like that anyway.
Question there from Nathan about similar to the ARL logo question: is there scope to introduce a non-pack logo for PCR? Again, in Australia, there is talk of government regulating a recycling label, most likely the ARL. Whether that includes PCR is yet to be seen. I think for most brands and retailers I've spoken to, the preference is that is left to the discretion of the brand. Not so they don't do it, but so they can put it on front of pack. Very normally, recycling the logo sits on the side or the back of a pack. Whereas if you've got PCR, quite often it's a front of pack claim. So I think that's the more likely way it would go, because that would encourage purchase and recoup some of the premium raw material costs. Anything from you, Lynn?
No, that's sort of covers it for us as well.
Okay, now heads of agreement. Question on heads of agreement. How does it operate? So I'm reading two questions at once. Will it impact membership if businesses are located in both New Zealand and Australia? Something we haven't discussed yet. We're in the very early stages, so we're looking at the scope of what would be in the heads of agreement. But that's the sort of thing we would want to discuss, because we obviously value brands who are operating on both sides of the ditch. So that may be something was definitely something we would consider and may roll out some benefits in the future. How does APCO influence operate with the SPSA and New Zealand soft plastics? So I probably skipped it on an earlier slide. So SPSA and APCO have an in-principle agreement for APCO to do the invoicing. So moving forward, so brands don't have to report twice and get invoicing from multiple places. APCO would essentially invoice brands on a quarterly basis using the data from your annual APCO reports. So again, that's in an early stage. We've got contract documents going backwards and forwards between lawyers at the moment. So hopefully that will land before we kick off in September. Lynn, I'll let you talk to New Zealand.
So for New Zealand, we've, as I said earlier, we are integrated within the ARL for labelling, and that's the main relationship with APCO, because our members who are operating in Australia may well be members of APCO in their own right, but New Zealand doesn't have a similar reporting requirement.
I think there's about one more question with 1 minute to go. Is there a trust issue with getting consumers back? Definitely. Unfortunately, soft plastics hit the headlines in Australia for all the wrong reasons, even though the intent and the cause of the collapse was not solely with RedCycle. The lack of transparency has caused a breach of trust. So we're very, very cautious and conscious of that. And then we will take a very conservative approach to rolling out collections with a lag behind capacity and proven capacity and certainty in their markets. I think that's about it for the questions. So just thanks everyone for the time. And if you've got any questions or you want to join, we'll definitely take those calls. But any questions, please reach out to Oscar, Lynn, or I. and we'll try keep these two programs as similar as possible as regulation allows as the development goes, or the progress of each develops in the coming years. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Anybody who wants a recording of this, just reach out to me and I'll make it available as well.